right, everybody here? So this is the talk on how to get a perfect 100 in Google PageSpeed. I am Mike, this is Nick, and let's get started. So your site just went live after being under construction for months. You got Varnish, Redis, Fastly, CloudFront. It's hosted on some extra large super jumbo instance. You are practically ready for anything. But you do wonder though, despite all that, how well will your site perform on a slow internet connection? And so you say you have HTTP2 up and running. You got CDNs everywhere. You should be going good. But you still wonder, is there actually a tool out there that will show me how it will perform? And yes, there is. You can make your web page fast on all devices. That's the little tagline right here. Make your web pages fast on all devices. Nice and small. And so ideally, this is what you're going to want. And yes, this 100 out of 100 did come from a Drupal site. And that site has Google Analytics, Facebook tracking, Google Tag Manager. It has all that. And you can still get a 100. So that's pretty cool. So let's say this is yours. This is from an unnamed TV station in the Portland area. They got a 19 out of 100. Or maybe this one here with a 37 out of 100, slightly better. How can you improve upon this score? But before I tell you, right now, if you have a 100 on a Drupal site, I have a bunch of $5 bills here. I will give you a $5 bill if you can get a 100 out of 100. And so the question is, why can't you get that 100 score? Doesn't Google know you're spending 12 grand a month on all this crazy hosting? What is going on? So to reiterate, that is the finish line. You want to get that 100. And so some of you might be wondering, why does it matter in the real sense of things? Have you ever abandoned a site on your phone? You're just wanting to load something. You're like, screw it, I'm going to go back to Facebook, and then maybe it'll load by then. Or you're going to look at Twitter while you're waiting for that site to load. And that's called the bounce rate. That's when people bounce off your site and they don't actually stay. Oh, I forgot to press the red button.
Yes.
Well, I got on GoPro. So yeah, why does it matter? Just because people are going to leave. And another huge thing that's happening is in July 2018, PageSpeed is going to be a ranking factor on mobile search. This is a huge change that Google announced January 17th of this year. I guess my red holder's not working. Let's try that again. Yeah, right there. January 17th, 2018. This is when they announced it. And so you have about 6 months to get this ready because your search ranking matters on this. And so research on this has said, 100 milliseconds, people on a page load time, people start to drop off. There's tons of studies. A good analogy I like to use is if you're driving 5 miles an hour below the speed limit, how angry do you get from the person in front of you? You're usually like, I want to get there faster. And so, just that we have a need to be fast. It's kind of ingrained in our heads. We want to be quick. And faster times also correlate with a lower bounce rate. Mobile connections, let's say you're in a cafe with Wi-Fi, and everyone in there is watching Netflix. How well is it going to work? It's not going to work very well. And so, long story short, users are not going to wait for your slow site to load. They're going to leave. And another little bonus is make your site work even in the slow lane of net neutrality. It's something that we all need to be thinking about. And remember, by not doing this, you have literally left money on the table. You're just pouring this money down the drain. And so you get this. Okay, how can we do this? What do we have to do? So it's easy, right? You just need to eliminate render blocking JavaScript and put CSS for above the fold content, right? But you know all those words, but in that order, not so much. It's pretty difficult, actually. And so we're here to guide you on that perfect score. And so first of all, let's take a deep dive into what Google means when it gives you that score in all the rankings. So the first rule is avoid landing page redirects. And so this is pretty easy, but a good way to emulate this is if you were to take a bunch of URL shorteners and string them all together. That's kind of what you don't want to do, because that's just a redirect to another redirect to another redirect. This is what it's talking about. And a good example is if you go from a HTTP site to a HTTPS site, which then redirects to your mobile site, which then redirects back to your HTTPS.mobile site. You want to avoid that. You want to have it all come in at once and be there. And what that means is you need to have some tricks in your HT access if you have this current issue. Luckily, most sites don't. Next up is enable compression. There are tons and tons of guides on how to do this. For Drupal, adveg, which is a module, will do gzip and brotli. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so I probably butchered it, for your CSS and JS. And then another metric is you need to improve your server response time. And this is where all the money usually gets poured in for website performance. This is where your varnish is at. CDNs usually, if you have an origin poll for your HTML, all that is all centered on this one aspect of it. But there's so many other aspects that need to be taken care of. Next one is leverage browser caching. This is kind of a sticking point for people because if you notice I have the Google Analytics logo there, Google's own tracker usually fails this test. And so there's two options you can do. There is a GitHub project that takes the whole API and has implemented it so you can self-host. And that's GA-Lite. And the other option is for your site to actually host analytics.js on your site itself. And for Drupal, the adveg module currently will actually do the hosting of that site. So it'll look for external JS and CS files and then pull them in and smartly update them as those sources get updated.
Although Drupal 8 adveg version does not yet do that, it's in the works.
It's in the works. So we're working on it. Next up is Minified Resources. That's just getting rid of all the white space. So this is different from compression. This is just a white space removal. CSS Core actually has done this since I think Drupal 6. And so, because it's a pretty easy problem to solve for that. JavaScript, a lot harder to do. HTML, there's another project to do that as well. There's guides on how to do this. Another tricky one coming up, optimize images. There's a Drupal module called Image API Optimize, and that will optimize any image style that you have. So you need to use image styles if you want to do that. If you don't want to use image styles, there are two programs, JPEG Tran and PNG Quant, and both of those will, you have command lines that you can run. And I recommend setting up like a cron job to have monthly just go through and make sure that they are optimized. And so that's different from like JPEG compression. It's just stripping out extra data like thumbnails, things like that that don't really matter when you're displaying the full image. Up next, we have prioritize visible content. So if you have a loading screen on a site, that will get flagged. And that's so you can have everything be good, but then have a loading screen, and you're not going to get that perfect 100. So something to consider. Good example of this, where if you don't have a loading screen, but it can still happen, is if you have an image background. Well, I'll start it over again. If you have white text on a white background, and that div loads in a image, you can't read that text until the image has actually been downloaded, and that's what can get flagged here. So it's kind of tricky. So just something to be mindful of.
Do you get fixed if let's say that's a mostly dark image, and if you set the background color on that div to black, say your text is white or something, does that fix the issue?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's usually like a one-line CSS fix. Just hey, set the background color to this, and then when the image loads, it will put that on top.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy to fix. A little bit trickier here, we have remove render blocking JavaScript. My recommendation is to use the defer tag, which basically means this is not blocking. Wait, you can render, and then you can wait until the page has been painted, and then start to work on the JavaScript. And the only issue with this, if you have inline jQuery, that relies on the external jQuery that you're pulling in, and all of a sudden your inline JS will be broken. And so you need to have a wrapper around that inline jQuery. For Drupal, the addbag module will actually automatically wrap your JS for you. So that's pretty handy.
Also, for Drupal 8, defer is still good, but Drupal 8 has moved most of the scripts into the footer, so already you're removing most render blocking. If you can add defer to the few that aren't in the footer, great, but it's a secondary concern. And you can't have inline scripts in Drupal 8 unless you're doing stuff that is against the APIs. So you probably aren't going to be breaking stuff with that defer as well.
All right, next up, optimize CSS delivery. This is the big one. If optimizing a website was a game, I'd call this the boss level. So if you want to beat the boss at the end of the internet, this is the boss right here. And so what we got is, that went too fast. Yeah, the whole secret is you want to inline critical CSS. What that basically means is whatever it takes to render that page, inline that. So nothing else, no other resources are needed. And so here's an example of a site where we have the inline CSS that was generated via a Node.js plugin, and then your external CSS uses our REL preload, and then you put an onload to switch that over to a style sheet. It's kind of tricky. This only works in Chrome currently. Firefox, it worked in 56, but then they broke it in 57 and 58, and I think it's going to be coming back in 59 or 60. So it's definitely cutting edge. There is a shim, I guess, like a workaround for browsers that don't support it, and I'll be talking about that in a second. But yeah, this is hard to do. It's you might say it's mind-blowing how tricky it is, because your CSS changes on every page, because what content is visible is different on every page, and so there's no easy way out of this. So you're going to need some tools to actually pull this one off. And so if you're really adventurous, there is the Node.js project called Penthouse. And then there's a couple of websites that will generate your CSS for you. Some of them work better than others. I'm actually debating if I should start up a service or not called fixedrenderblocking.com, which will then tie in and kind of make it an automatic service that would just, you'd post to it and you'd get back your critical CSS. So that's something I'm debating about doing. So we'll see if we get there. But and then to the shim, for older browsers, it's called Load CSS. And if you're using Drupal, the advig module will take care of everything except for the actual generation of the critical CSS. Because you need a browser to do that. And the only way to really do that is to have Chrome embedded. And I don't want to ship advig with Chrome in it because that sounds insane. And so, just you can check this off until you change your CSS or HTML. That's a fuzzy picture of Bob Ross. It says keep calm and paint happy trees. So quick recap, 100%, that's what you want. And advig will cover these rules here. The render blocking, compression, browser caching, and minification of JavaScript. Rules that may not be covered by advig, redirects, server response time, but honestly you just need to turn on the cache. So like the core cache that comes with Drupal, that will usually make this problem go away. Optimize images, a little bit tricky to do, but there is a module that takes care of that for you. Visible content prioritization, you just make it simple. The less stuff you're loading, the better off you're going to be with that metric. The rest of these, gzip, minify, those are all pretty easy. You can do a quick Google search on how to get those. And so, this sounds really hard to do on every page. And so luckily, you only need to do it on landing pages. And so my recommendation is, if you have Google Analytics, you can do a query that will tell you what are your top 10 landing pages. And it'll tell you exactly how to get that perfect score for landing pages. And for advig, we have a video, let me pull it up here, on how to configure it. So this has been slightly sped up just to kind of show you how simple it is to actually install it. And this will take it from about a 55 to a 95, just within about 30 seconds here. So we're going to go through, install a couple of these submodules, and then we're going to advig and say, oh, you need to turn on the caching. Okay, did that. And then for all these, just do a couple of configurations or use the recommended settings. Here we just compressed all the JavaScript. So that's the JS minification. Then use recommended settings, and you're done. So I've made it as almost as easy as possible. There is a wiki on how to do that, and the actually the README file has directions on how to do that. So the advig README file, you just follow that, and it'll lead you to a perfect 100 score. Next video is to generate the critical CSS. So we'll just go here, critical CSS. So this is a site I like to use. So I'm using Drupal.org as an example. So what you do is you just take that chunk of code and you're going to copy that into, so if you have the Bootstrap module, you copy it into sites, all themes, Bootstrap, critical CSS, anonymous, URLs, front.css. So once you have that, it'll look for the pattern based off of the URL. You can also do it off node type. And so it'll just take the front.css and it sees it and it'll automatically switch the rendering to make your CSS deferred, and it'll inline this. And so these three slides that you just saw, that will take just about any Drupal site up to a 100, just like that.
And is that the advanced aggregation that does that switch, or is that?
Yeah, so yeah, the add big module is what looks
For that path?
Yeah, looks for this path.
Do you have to configure that path, or it just knows to look there?
It knows to look for there. That's what the whole check the recommended settings. That's what that will do for you.
And if you're not using that as a base theme, do you use an API hook, or how do you alter that for a custom theme, for example?
Well, yeah. So if your theme is whatever,
it's just going to be whatever that is.
Yeah. So whatever.
Okay.
Whatever theme name is right here, you just replace that with your theme name.
Gotcha.
And there are actually hooks in there too, so you can. There's a hook before and a hook after, and you can alter what directories it's going to look in. So if you don't like this directory structure, you can alter it. Or if you want to have,
Add anything additional to it or something?
Yeah, you can, instead of looking at node objects, let's say you have a different type of object, you can then flip that and have it search for that object type when it's looking for CSS files. Mm-hmm. Or you can actually input in the CSS you want as a string, and it'll take care of that too. So yeah, it's got hooks coming and going on this little bit of code here in the back.
Is there a way to automate generation of that file so you could use it in the build process?
That is the tricky part. So that's why I want to create that service called fixedrenderblocking.com. If you want to automate it in your build process, let's see here, you want to use Penthouse here. Let's see if my little laser pointer shows up. There it is. Yeah, so you want to use Pocket, Joe's, and then Penthouse. And if you want to automate your build, that will do it for you. It is hard to do, long story short. It's not easy.
Is the speed benefit worth it? I mean, I know it's necessary to get to 100, but does that correspond to the actual performance?
I'd say, yeah. The two biggest ones is your deferring JavaScript and your CSS delivery. Because what that means is, with the HTML, once that lands on your browser, it can start to render. With the JS blocking or the CSS blocking, it will not render until it has those files downloaded. And so this makes it, the minute the HTML shows up, you get content, which is really powerful. Yeah.
Could you just explain a little bit more about critical CSS, or you mentioned above the fold? Is it talk about that? How's it determined what it decides needs to be inline?
So if you just have a web page and what it loads in your viewport, so like you're on your phone,
yeah,
and what you see without scrolling at all, that is considered above the fold content, because it's so whatever CSS is required to render that section, that is critical CSS.
And fully rendered, or just make it usable?
It depends on how complex you have it, but it's usually fully rendered. So I mean, if you have fonts that are blocking, you'll want to switch it in somehow so the text is visible. Any big images, things like that. Make sure the background color kind of matches the image so it doesn't switch too much. So all these little tricks.
Yeah.
And yeah, the service, the fixedrenderblocking.com, I'm hoping to automate pretty much all this. So you just install AdVig, go to fixedrenderblocking.com, and you're done. That's the goal. We'll see if I can get there.
And so you talked about it's browser specific. And you mentioned Chrome and that it might get fixed in Firefox. What about, Safari or iOS mobile?
All those will work with that shim. So Internet Explorer, I think they support IE8 actually. So old versions of Internet Explorer all the way up can all use this technique for critical CSS. And so there are a couple of pitfalls. If you add CSS or JS not via the API, Advanced doesn't know about it, and that can be a problem. Any inline JS that doesn't work well with Defer, you might have to rewrite that. So I try my best to kind of encapsulate it, but even then it may not work correctly. Any external fonts. So currently I have Google fonts covered. So I coded against Google fonts, but there could be other fonts out there that get loaded externally. And so with that, you beat the internet boss. His name is Al Capone. He's the big boss at the end of the internet. I'm a dad, so I can make these jokes, right? You have a wiki here. So it's going to be groups.drupal.org and node, and the number is going to be 517292. And you can see a couple people have posted in there. They started off, I think, in the 50s, and they got up to like a 99. And at that point, I'm like, it's diminishing returns. You're good. Don't sweat it. And so, if you're not sure about the Advig module, there are alternatives. There is Google Mod PageSpeed. It'll never get you to the perfect 100, but it can sort of do Defer.js and inline CSS, sort of. It doesn't work super well, but it does work. The nice thing about this, though, is it's a Nginx and Apache plugin, so you can pretty much slap this on most sites, and you can get it to work. There's a GitHub project that kind of has a lot of this put together. It's called Blink Loader. I think the idea behind the name was, the site will load in a blink of an eye. It's like, but they advertise trying to, getting that perfect page score as well. And another one that will do this is Google Accelerated Mobile Pages, or AMP. This one is a controversial topic amongst developers, because you're kind of giving up control of your site to Google, because your page will actually, the URL is going to be google.com/your site. And so if you're looking at it, it's not clear that you're on whose site you're on, because your URL bar is going to say google.com. And so, there's pluses and minuses to it. What I say is do the other things, and if you still need AMP so you can get that lightning bolt icon, then go ahead and do it, but at least you'll know that you've done as much as you can. And so, you might be wondering, well, what site has been working on to improve their PageSpeed score? And Drupal.org actually has been using Advig to get their page speed times quicker. And so when we started 2 years ago on this project, I had no clear path to a perfect 100. And over time, we've discovered ways we can actually get Drupal.org to a 100. So hopefully in the near future, we can get that. The biggest issue for them currently is getting that Node.js Penthouse plugin up and running, because that's, like I said, that is tricky to do. But what we've done so far is with Deferring JS, There's something called UC Browser. It's really popular in China, India, and Indonesia. And based off of Google Analytics, the page load time for that browser went from 13.3 seconds down to 5.4 seconds. So, this does work. You will see results from this. And that's not even getting the perfect 100. I think we're at 80 right now or something like that. And so, yeah, Advig was built to try to get that perfect 100. One of the more interesting things was when we switched to HTTP2 on Drupal.org, Google Fonts actually blocked the rendering of the site in a worse way on a slow mobile connection, because the browser will stream everything on that one pipe and then it'll load other external resources. And so it blocks the rendering, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll show you a graphic here. But there's more. So what can you do after you get a perfect 100? What are the next steps if you want to go bonkers and try to get even better? There are certain things you can do. So this is webpagetest.org. This is a really good tool. I use this all the time. And it shows you how your browser loads on like a really, really slow connection. And so I like to use Mobile Edge because that's about as slow as you're going to see out in the wild. So if you're at a soccer stadium or somewhere where there's tons of people, your site, you can just watch the page render in about 2 minutes. It takes forever. And so you can emulate that on the site here. It's pretty cool. So here's the interface. So if we use Drupal.org project Drupal, this is the results page that you get. And I'll point out more to the interesting things here is you have the start render time of 7.5 seconds. And what that means is nothing gets displayed until for 7.5 seconds. And then once that 7.5 seconds hits, then things will start to paint on the page. And because it loads so slow, you can see each resource loading individually. And you can see it loads the CSS, then the JavaScript, and then down here we have fonts.google APIs.com. And the Google font, because it's a CSS file, that is blocking the whole render of the page. So it's kind of interesting, but it makes it really clear because you can see once that's loaded, you get that green bar, right here that shows you, this resource loaded, and boom, now we're rendering. So it's really easy to kind of go back and see what is rendering. In an ideal world, that green bar is going to be right here. Right after the HTML is loaded, it'll start to paint the page. That's what you want. And so, to give you an idea, this is what an H2 connection looks like. It's one big pipe where all the information comes down. A HTTP1 connection, you have 6 connections that go out, and the browser can kind of prioritize amongst all its connections what it's going to get. So that's the only drawback I've ever seen with H2 is external CSS can actually slow down the rendering. Other than that, you are good. So I highly recommend using HTTP2. Another crazy project from Google is Lighthouse. And this is actually built into Google Chrome under the Audits tab. And this will give you a ranking on your performance, progressive web app, accessibility, best practices, and your SEO. And it's really in depth. It gives you gobs and gobs and gobs of information of like what to do. So this is Drupal, Drupal.org. It shows all sorts of interesting bits of data about like off-screen images and everything else. And so if this is where, like, once you've rendered everything fast, you know, like how can you do loading images, you know, like, what's that called when you load them?
Progressive.
Yeah, progressive loading, things like that, or they don't load until they're actually visible. So you scroll up and then the images load in. I think Pinterest is a classic example of that, where you just scroll up, more images show up, scroll up, more images show up. You know, things like that. That's what this is kind of talking about here. They got all sorts of diagnostics. You have critical request chains, user timing marks and measures. I mean, it gets really in depth. You know, Google actually has multiple talks just on Lighthouse. It's absolutely nuts what you can do with it. Progressive web apps, this gets into the realm of service workers, which is kind of mind-blowing. What it allows you to do is serve your page even when your server is down or they don't have an internet connection. So that's next level stuff. So as long as they visited the site before, then the service worker is on their browser and they can come back to that site and look around because you've basically loaded your site on their device.
Wow.
It's kind of nutty what you can do with that. And I think Firefox is going to be supporting that pretty soon. Right now it's just Chrome only.
And you can even store data in that local cache, and then when it comes back online, resubmit it back to your programming for that.
Yeah, so you can do like form submits and things like that, and then once they have an internet connection, it will go.
Wow.
So it's next level, you know, it's out there, but it does work, and they will let you know about it with Lighthouse, and this is built into Chrome, so it's pretty cool. And then accessibility, this is always important to make sure that, you know, you got things that are accessible to everyone. And then finally, you have some best practices and SEO. And so this, you know, yeah, there's so much on there, it's insane. The other thing you can do is the Chrome user experience report. This is pretty wild what you can actually get off of it. It's basically anybody who uses the Chrome browser, all that data, that load times and things like that, that will get sent to Google, and then you can actually query your own web page and see how long it takes other users to load it in the wild. It provides real world sites for the top 1 million on the page, and its data is updated monthly. It is really hard to use, but if you really want to know about how your site is working on every device out there, this will do it for you. So it's pretty crazy. So wrapping it up a little bit here, what's going to happen if you don't get that 100 out of 100? Once again, all that money is just going to fly away, and you're not going to get it because the reason that people went to your site, they forgot about it, and whatever your site's supposed to do, it's not going to do because no one's looking at it. And to really emphasize it, July 2018, page speed is going to be a raking factor. And so, did anyone actually get a 100 out of 100? Because, you know, I promised $5 here. Anybody? All right.
So we get $2.50 if I was halfway there?
You get a 50. Yeah. All right, so any questions? I did have some videos loading of Drupal.org, my site that I work on, it's a 100, and an unnamed site that actually has a 96 out of 100, but it takes 56 seconds to load. So I'll go ahead and play that one while I'm answering questions here. Slow site. So this gets a 96 out of 100, but the guy cheated to actually get that score. So right here, that loading screen is going to go for another 50 seconds.
And this was on a
It's just a
what kind of connection?
This is a mobile edge connection. So this is worst case scenario that you will find out in the real world. Any questions? In the back.
So first of all, the AdVeg module is super awesome. It's made tons of changes with my clients and stuff. The comment that you made about having this stuff just on the landing pages was like eye-opening for me, so that was awesome. But the problem is, some of the sites that I put the AdVeg on, because of some of the JavaScript stuff, it just turned into a nightmare, so I had to turn it off. Is there a way to just turn it on for the landing pages?
If you do a custom module that controls that, you definitely can. That is something that I'm actually looking into doing.
So the AdVeg allows you to hook into it to do that?
Yeah, if you do like a global conf and then the AdVeg variable name, you can control it that way. But you should create a issue in the AdVeg issue queue, and we'll start to work on that. So here's Drupal.org. As you can see, it's a little bit quicker than the other site. Same internet connection speed here. And the webpagetest.org is what generates these videos. And they're really, really handy to show you exactly how things are loading. So here, you can see that image got loaded late in the game. Ideally, you'd actually want that image to load pretty early because it's really important for that page to print. So this is where I get the 100 out of 100. Datasphere.com, that's the company I work for. This is a portal. So right there, that's pretty much 99% rendered in about under 10 seconds. And now it's just waiting for all this other stuff to load. It doesn't really change too much. In the back.
Yes, what about like carousels on a front page? I mean, you're going to have, a few images. Just optimize those.
Yeah, so yes, front end images or front homepage images, things like that. You want to optimize those by hand if possible. Like really dive in and get that sucker tuned as best you can. Like the logo, if that shows up on every page, that is a really good one to optimize because that's everywhere.
We've been playing with SVG replacements for images on load. Is that effective or is it just cute?
I'd say that's effective because usually SVGs are smaller.
Super small, yeah.
Yeah, and so with H2, those are just going to come streaming down. And you can actually do a H2 push, which I recommend only doing on landing pages. Don't do it on
Like content pages.
yeah, don't do it in deep pages because you're going to be pushing the same content that should already be in their cache, their browser cache. So it should just be like browser pages where you do that. But that's kind of advanced stuff that browsers are still kind of working on, trying to better do.
Any experience with Adobe Typekit for web fonts?
Do you host the web fonts locally then? No, that's a third-party remote. Have not, but you could open up an issue and look into it. Yeah.
Do you have a sense for the impact of like data URIs for little icon images and stuff in CSS?
At this point, I would say don't do that if you have HTTP2.
Yeah, because of the single pipe.
Yeah, the single pipe kind of fixes all that old school inlining base 64 tricks that you used to do.
Right.
And inlining those actually hurt mobile performance from what I've seen. So mobile the browsers on mobiles usually are a lot slower, and they don't parse the base64 as quick. So, yeah.
I think it could be a research-oriented question, but when you talked about the Lighthouse service worker concept, does it relate to the main cache layer integration in whole another world?
Does that memcache in like Drupal?
Could be the integration, but the project that I'm coming out of was talking about the same concept. Everything is loading. If you have visited once, your internet connection is completely low. You still can see the page content in there. So does it relate to the same concept? I'm going to read about it, but I was just wondering.
I can't answer that authoritatively, but I think so. That sounds similar. I haven't really dived into that too much yet. It's kind of a whole new concept that they're pushing pretty hard at Google. So, any other questions?
Yeah. How did they fake it?
Oh, that one that got a 96 out of 100?
Yeah.
So what it was they just had a loading, that little dial, the spinner. So Google saw that spinner and was like, okay, we got content painted. And so everything else was pretty much fixed, but it was all hidden behind that loading screen. So instead of having things load in individually, he just put a big white screen in front of it and removes that once it's loaded. So it's kind of it's a trade-off. Some people don't want to have their page be displayed until everything's perfect. But if you're on a slow site, mobile connection, that's going to be bad news. As you just saw, it's really bad.
Yeah, that was super frustrating.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even touch it, but yeah.
But I mean, you can put that that website in, and it will it gives you a 96 out of 100. But for prioritized visible content, it gives it a 1%. So I mean, it's complaining about something there, and that was the visible content, because that's obviously not prioritized.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks for coming, guys, and I'll be upstairs if you have any questions or concerns. I'll be at a table. I'll write the number down, and you can come find me up there.
All right.